Imagine a story, a tale so shocking that it grasped the nation's imagination. Meet the trunk murderess, Winnie Ruth Judd. In the 1930s, her story was full of love, betrayal, and grisly deeds that captivated America. Join me as we uncover this chilling story here on the Last Witness podcast. We're first going to go into Winnie's background. First, start off with her maiden name, which was Winnie Ruth McKinnell. She was born in Oxford, Indiana on January 29th, 1905. Her father's name was Reverend H.J. McKinnell, and her mother's name was Carrie. At the age of 17, she married Dr. William Judd, who happened to be a World War I veteran and was 20 years her senior. The pair did move around the different states due to his profession, but actually decided to settle in California. By 1930s, the couple lived separately, although they actually remained in communication. So Mr. Judd remained in California and Mrs. Judd decided to move to Phoenix, Arizona, which we're going to go ahead and go by her nickname, which is Ruth. Ruth met John J. Hollerman, aka Happy Jack. He was a 44-year-old businessman in Phoenix who was actually super active in the city's political side and social circles. So he was a well-known dude in Phoenix. Also a married man, well known as far as a playboy wise too. Ruth and Jack became friendly, a little too friendly to the point of having an affair. A few months later, after Ruth moved to Phoenix, Arizona, she became a secretary at Gruno Medical Center in Phoenix. That's where she met the two victims, Agnes and Lori, which was she was an X-ray technician, and her roommate, Sammy Samuelson. The two were also super friendly and already knew Jack. So Ruth's relationship just kind of smoothed her way in since they already knew each other. Their relationship as friends kept building to the point where they actually moved in together in 1931. So Ruth, Lori, and Sammy decided to live together and just invite Ruth into their home. Hey, they're friends. However, their differences actually broke them apart. So then Ruth decided to get her own place just down the street from Lori and Sammy's home. A few months later, they actually have a housewarming party. From what the record shows, it's like some kind of party that they had, and Jack happened to be there. Other friends came, but before Ruth came, the other friends that they had invited, which happened to be Lori and Sammy's friends, they ended up leaving before Ruth got there. So it was just the four of them, from what Ruth has actually stated. And at the time of this crime, Ruth was 26, Lori was 27, and Sammy was 24. Just give you a little bit more in details of age because they were very young women, bright futures, so much ahead of them, and living their best life. We're going to go a little bit into the murder details, and we'll start with what the prosecution was saying is that Ruth dismembered their bodies. Well, one body. And in this case, it was Sammy's body by placing the head, torso, and lower legs into a black shipping trunk, and then upper legs were placed in a beige hat box, which literally what it is, a hat box. Lori's body was stuffed intact into a second black shipping trunk. So you're kind of getting more of the scenery at the time. So we have Sammy, who was too big to fit in one a trunk that was cut into pieces and separated into two separate trunks. And then you have Lori's body in one trunk by herself. 2 days after the murders on Sunday, October 18th, Ruth, with her left hand bandaged from a gunshot wound, boarded the overnight train from Phoenix to Los Angeles, California, with her trunks and additional luggage. And at the time, we know what's in those trunks. En route to Los Angeles, Ruth's trunks came under suspicion by the baggage handler, which his name was J.H. Mapes, due to the foul odor and some fluid seeping out of the trunks. Mape alerted the district baggage agent in Los Angeles, and his name was Arthur V. Anderson, suspecting contraband like deer meat. This is 1930, so traveling with deer meat probably was super common, so that was why it was suspected to be that specific thing. Burton McKinnell, Ruth's brother, and someone that was actually a junior, currently a junior at the University of Southern California, picked her up from the train station, unaware of the murders or the bodies. So he doesn't know what's going on. Ruth departed with her brother, leaving those trunks behind. And around 4:30 p.m. afternoon, Anderson called the Los Angeles Police Department to report suspicious trunks. After picking these locks, the police discovered these bodies. Meanwhile, Burton had already dropped off his sister somewhere in Los Angeles. As of right now, we still don't know exactly where, was never disclosed, but we know for a fact that her brother dropped her off somewhere in Los Angeles. So that gives us the insight that maybe she felt like she was about to be caught and she had to dip on out of there. She actually hid for a few days until she actually surrendered herself on October 23rd, on a Friday, 1931. So whatever it was, maybe it was bothering her that she was like, you know what, I gotta turn myself in and let these people know what's exactly going on. So we're gonna move forward into the trial and the conviction. Ruth's trial began January 19th, 1932 at the Maricopa County Courthouse, and the judge reviewing this case was Howard C. Speakman. The state argued that Ruth acted in premeditated acts, so this was premeditation, that the relation between all three women was because they all had some type of relation or issue involving Jack, the playboy that we discussed at the beginning. The prosecution maintained that Ruth had her self-inflicted wounds, that she was the one that caused the gunshot in her left hand, that this didn't happen to nobody else. Nobody else did this to her. Jack didn't do it to her. The two women, the victims, didn't do it to her. Just no one else did it to her but Ruth herself. The prosecution maintained that Ruth had herself inflicted these gunshot wounds all throughout the entire court process. There was nothing that was keeping them like any other option but the one that they had. Ruth's defense contested that she was innocent because she was insane, but did not introduce the self-inflicted for the record. So they're saying, hey, that she didn't do it, but she's insane, pretty much. Ruth did not take the stand in her own defense. So it's almost one of those like unsaid things that if you don't speak, that you did it, which not necessarily always true, but people outside looking in that are in, watching this court are probably thinking like, oh, she's guilty. She's not even speaking up. The jury found Ruth guilty of first-degree murder for Lori on February 8th, and appeal was unsuccessful. Ruth was sentenced by Judge Speakman to be hanged February 7th, 1933, and sent to Arizona State Prison in Florence, Arizona. This came despite a sworn affidavits from 4 of the jurors claiming they only voted to recommend death for one of their fellow jurors, which is former Mesa Mayor Dan Kleinman, persuade them that it was the best way to get Ruth to give up anybody else that might have been involved with the crime. So, kind of here or there. Ruth's attorneys uncovered evidence that Dan had already made up his mind that he would vote to convict Ruth and send her to prison. They were able to actually show two pills on this basis, arguing that Dan's behavior amounted to juror misconduct. So somehow they felt like he played a huge part in their decision of prosecuting Ruth. However, neither of these appeals were successful. So, not really good on evidence, because they were not successful. Ruth's death sentence was overturned after a 10-day hearing found her mentally incompetent. Ruth was then actually sent to Arizona State for the insane on April 24th, 1933. So homegirl went from prison to going to an insane because they thought homegirl was crazy for her actions. An actual side note, which is a fact as well, might be a little strange. While this was actually going on, her court time and the court, the prosecution, the evidence, while everything was going on and Ruth was actually in prison, their landlord, which was Lori and Sammy's landlord, placed an ad and said that if anybody wanted to come see this home, they can come see it. Like a little, and the landlord was actually charging 10 cents per person. Wild. So wild. But again, this is 1930s. Now that's probably never going to happen, but you can see that there was probably an obsession with this type of case as well. Then we're going to talk about the escape as well because Miss Ruth was super busy. So Ruth escaped from this mental institution between the years of 1933 and 1963. Once walking all the way to along the Southern Pacific Railroad tracks, homegirl was on a roll to get where she needed to go. Her final escape occurred on October 8th, 1963, using a key to the front door of the hospital given by a friend. So somebody was in that hospital, was helping homegirl out, and said, "Here you go," and let her escape through the front door. She ended up in San Francisco Bay Area where she became a live-in maid for a very wealthy family in a mansion that overlooked the bay, using a different name, which was Moran Kane. After 6 years, her true identity was actually discovered, and then she was actually taken back to Arizona August 18th, 1969. So she was living her best life for 6 years. Somebody figured out who she was and took her back to Arizona so she can continue to be held responsible for her actions. Ruth hired famed San Francisco defense attorney Melvin Belly, who then hired Larry Debus to handle her case. Governor Jack Williams of Arizona agreed to sign for Judd's release as long as the meeting was kept hush hush. So, thinking about 1930s, I'm getting like little mob ties in here when it comes to like the politics played in this, and this girl Ruth was just mixed into that and around a lot of people, and it all comes with of her messing with Jack. And because Jack was a well-known businessman in Phoenix and knew a lot of politicians, huge social circles, like I said before, that he played a huge part into this, because Ruth actually stated during her court that the reason why this happened was because of Jack. Jack was the one that that did the murders and then told her that she needed to do the steps that she needed to do and cutting up bodies and help him get rid of all the evidence. But there was absolutely no evidence that agreed with what Ruth was saying. The only evidence was that she committed these crimes by herself. Ruth was paroled and released on December 22nd, 1971, after 2 years of legal writing. So just back and forth, back and forth. And in 1983, the state of Arizona issued her an absolute discharge, meaning she was no longer a parolee. So they were done. They're like, all right, maybe she was a law abiding citizen. She wasn't doing nothing crazy for those 6 years. And it's been so long because by then it was about 38 years that she was held and, when she was locked up. So she spent a long time, from what they thought, in jail and let her go. Ruth returned to California to work for that family that she had previously worked for. Later lived in Stockton, California, and then went back to Phoenix a few years later, and that's where she eventually passed on. She died October 23rd, 1998, at the age of 93, 67 years to the day that she surrendered herself to the LAPD in 1931. So, this is a different time when these murders happen. And we just wanted to take a moment to really see how history was at that time, how crime was handled at that time, and just take a moment to really pay our respects to Agnes and Sammy, beautiful young ladies who lost their lives for what we really don't know why during a simple disagreement between women, and lives were cut short. So, thank you for sitting here listening to my brief commentary, storytelling about our trunk murderess, and I hope you enjoyed.